Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
I ask unanimous consent to engage in a colloquy with my Republican colleague.
Without objection.
We are in the midst of a debt crisis. I think some of it created by the President because he has refused to take off the table the fact that we would default on our debt. I think that's irresponsible, and without a doubt the President should come forward and say that he will pay the interest on the debt. On our side, we've been willing to compromise all along. We've been offering plans. We've passed 2 plans in the House. Now we have a plan before us, a Democrat plan to raise the debt ceiling. And there are some of us who would vote for this Democrat plan, who might require some amendments or some compromise. There would have to be some input from our side. And yet, even though this bill was introduced yesterday and Republicans said they would vote for it, the Democrats are now filibustering their own bill. Well, it's funny, they filibuster their own bill and then point fingers and say we're trying to stop things. We're here today to try to move things forward, and so in the spirit of trying to reach a compromise before the deadline comes, I would ask unanimous consent that the vote on the pending cloture motion occur immediately or as soon as possible, 5 p.m. today.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Reserving the right to object. Under the filibuster rules of the Senate, there is a requirement of 60 votes for cloture. We have said that we are prepared to move to a timely vote on this pending amendment, a majority vote, the same as the vote that Speaker Boehner had in the House. And I would object unless the senator from Kentucky wants to amend his unanimous consent request to make it clear that this will be a unanimous consent, which I have spelled out here in detail if he'd like me to present it.
Reserving the right to object, I would remind the senator that there is a difference between the Senate and the House. Our founding fathers gave great power and leeway to the Senate. We were meant to be a check and a balance against unbridled enthusiasm sometimes from one party or another, and so I would object to that motion.
Is there objection to the original request?
Object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to present an amendment. This amendment would be an amendment to the Reid bill, and under this amendment, what would happen is I have at least 10 Republicans who will vote for the Harry Reid bill, which would allow a compromise, which would allow the debt ceiling to rise. I know the President is worried about having campaign time. He's worried about getting back out and doing some fundraisers. He doesn't want to consider the debt ceiling again before his election or his re-election campaign. So this amendment that I would offer would allow us to move forward in a bipartisan way. All Republicans are asking for is that we balance our budget gradually over a 7 to 8 year period. What this amendment would do, and that I'm asking unanimous consent to present, is an amendment that says that we will raise the debt ceiling contingent upon passage of balanced budget amendment. Now, I would ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to present this amendment to the Reid bill.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard.
See, I think what this illustrates is that, compromise, everybody says, the pundits say that compromise is the mark of an enlightened person. We're trying to compromise. I just offered to pass the leader's bill. I've offered to work with them. I'm from the Tea Party. They say we won't compromise. I'm willing to raise the debt ceiling. In fact, we worked on a motion that's gotten more votes than any other motion that's been set forward, and that was cut, cap, and balance. That would have required a balanced budget amendment to be passed, but would have raised the debt ceiling. What do we hear from the other side? Intransigence. Who's refusing to compromise? Sounds to me like the other side's refusing to compromise. I have with me my distinguished colleague from Utah, and I'd like to hear his thoughts on where the fault lies and where we could come to if we were to compromise to try to find an agreement.
Mr. President, a number of us, myself included, have been arguing since January, ever since we arrived here and were sworn in this very room, that the national debt is a permanent problem. The almost $15 trillion that we now owe as a nation is permanent. It's going to take a long time to pay off. There are people who are not yet old enough to vote. There are people who will be born in a few years, who are not even here, will one day have to assist in paying off that debt. Now, the fact that this is a long-term problem means that it requires a long-term solution. That's why we've been saying all along that we ought not raise the debt limit yet again. Extending our national debt by another $2.5 trillion, more or less, without a permanent solution in place. Herein lies the problem. It's difficult or impossible for one Congress to come up with a set of budget numbers that will necessarily bind future Congresses. We can come up with a plan to cut $2 or $3 trillion over a 10 or a 15-year period, but if future Congresses don't want to go along with that, they can find a way out of that. This has happened again and again, as we've seen with Graham-Rudman-Hollings, as we've seen with the PAYGO rules. Congress becomes a walking, breathing waiver unto itself. We need a permanent solution. This is why we've settled on the need for a balanced budget amendment. Now, as my distinguished colleague, the junior senator from Kentucky, has just pointed out, there is no intransigence in our position. Those of us who identify with the Republican Party, those of us who identify with the Tea Party, are people who want a solution. We were sent here with a mandate by voters, a mandate that says the federal government is too big and too expensive. Now, resistance to this message from the other side of the aisle, as vehement as that resistance may be, is not genuine if what it says is that this insistence, the insistence for a balanced budget amendment, is itself reflective of an unwillingness to compromise. There are myriad opportunities to compromise within that general framework. We've offered that. We've extended that. Republicans have now submitted no fewer than 2 bills that have passed the House of Representatives to address the debt limit issue, both of which have stopped dead in their tracks over here without further opportunity, most importantly without a response by the Democratic Party in the Senate or otherwise. So if there is either party in this discussion that is refusing to compromise, it's not ours. If there is any group that has failed to offer solutions, it cannot be described as the Tea Party movement. I asked my colleague, the junior senator from Kentucky, do you see any element within the Tea Party movement, any element within the Republican Party that is unwilling to compromise or that's wanting to block just for the sake of blocking?
No, from going to hundreds of Tea Party rallies and grassroots rallies with voters across America, what I see is they want what's best for America. I don't think they really particularly care whether it's a Republican plan or a Democrat plan. They want what's best for America, but they want a solution. And the problem with the debate here in Washington is all of the proposals seem to want to add more debt. We have $14 trillion worth of debt, and both the Republican and the Democrat proposal we're going to add $7 to $8 trillion more in debt. What I think the folks in the Tea Party and those who are concerned about passing along this debt to their kids and grandkids want, I think what they want is us to spend less. You know, I think a great contrast and what illustrates the problem here is that spending is going up 7% a year. Nobody's really talking about cutting that spending. They're talking about cutting the rate of growth of that spending. And there's a new plan out called the one-penny plan. It would actually have real cuts of 1 penny on every dollar spent. The other side pulls their hair and says, oh, you're so radical. And we say, we just want to cut 1 penny out of every dollar of government spending. Is that radical? And so the president has said it's a dysfunctional place. He is right in that sense. But I think some of the dysfunction comes from the hypocrisy or from the other side not really listening. For example, the balanced budget amendment. They say that polls show routinely 75% of Americans are for it. And routinely, about 14% of Americans seem to be approving of this body. So the question I would have is maybe it's that we're not listening well enough. Maybe we're not doing what the people want.
That certainly appears to be the case. And it's a reminder to us of the fact that no matter how much we might be tempted at times to demagogue this issue, no matter how tempting it might be for certain members of this body to cast blame elsewhere, they cannot escape one simple fact, which is that the American people are demanding more. They're demanding that we spend less. They're demanding that we stop this barbaric practice of perpetual, massive-scale deficit spending. Why? Well, because it erodes individual liberty. It takes money that people have not yet made and spends it and obligates them to repay it, in some cases before they're old enough to vote, in other cases before they're even born. And so we need a permanent solution. When we put something in the Constitution, it serves as a permanent reminder of the fact that we as a people have made a decision and we're going to move forward. Not everybody will necessarily agree as to how best we should move forward, having made that decision. But the American people, overwhelmingly to the tune of 75%, support the idea that we should amend the Constitution to restrict Congress's deficit spending power.
I think the other thing, when people talk about Washington being dysfunctional and they are upset with what's going on in Washington, I think one of the things that upsets people is hypocrisy. People who say one thing and do another. And, you know, it really is. That's a sad state of affairs. Sad state of affairs. People run on one idea and then they completely change their ideas. The president was a U.S. senator. He spoke on this floor, and here are his words. In 2006, the fact that we are here today debating raising the America's debt limit is a sign of leadership failure. See, it was sort of pointing fingers. Everybody's pointing fingers. It's someone else's fault. See, I call that sort of the empty partisanship, but his conclusion then that voting to raise the debt limit would send a bad signal. It would send a signal to our leaders that they're doing the right thing. I've often said that there's no objective evidence that Washington or Congress is spending your money wisely. The Pentagon says they're too big to be audited, can't balance their books. There was $100 billion unaccounted for in the budget last year. There's $5 billion the GAO found of duplicate programs. There's, I believe, 82 different programs training workers. You know, could we not maybe deal with one federal program training workers instead of 82 different ones doing the same thing? But this is it. The president said that raising the debt ceiling would be a mistake. But now that he's president, he's changed his mind. The hypocrisy of that, I think, is what makes Americans unhappy. The president said the same thing on war. He said no president should unilaterally go to war without congressional authority, and here we are at war in Libya with no vote in Congress. He says, well, he has a piece of paper from the United Nations. We didn't elect the United Nations. We have a Constitution, and it requires that those things be debated in Congress. People are unhappy because we're not doing the people's business. We haven't had a budget here in 800 days. Do you know what? It's against the law. It's against the law not to have a budget. We haven't had a budget in 800 days, but the budget law says we should have a budget every year. We're supposed to match our appropriations bills with the budget. We're not doing it. The American people are unhappy. We are dysfunctional, but we're not doing the people's business. But we're also, we've become profligate spenders, spending money that we don't have. And really, I think we risk great dangers. And I would ask the question to the senator from Utah is, what's the answer? How do we get out of this when we seem to be so far apart, and even on both sides, we don't seem to be tackling the issues in a way that would cause or allow for significant cuts in spending?
I have a friend named Ron McMillan, who lives in my hometown of Alpine, Utah. And he's the author of a number of books dealing with business negotiation, dealing with trying to figure out how you can get to compromise.
Senators has expired.
Can we have an extension of 2 minutes to finish our thoughts?
I don't object as long as this side is given additional time.
Thank you.
Without objection.
And in that series of books, the Crucial Conversation line of books, one of the things he encourages people to do is to find whatever common ground they can reach. I think there is common ground among the American people generally that we should balance our budget. Not everyone agrees about how we balance the budget, what should be cut, but they do agree that we should balance it. That being the case, that's where we ought to focus our efforts, is on amending our law of laws, that 224-year-old document that has fostered the development of the greatest civilization the world has ever known. Change it, again, to improve it, to restrict Congress's borrowing power. The plan proposed by the Democrats that's now about to come before us puts our budgeting process on autopilot, doesn't require another budget for 2 years, preserving the ability of Obamacare to fund itself without a single additional debate in Congress. This is wrong. This is not the right approach. I object to it for that reason. I, along with my other Republican colleagues, are prepared to vote on this and vote no on it right now. We are not the ones delaying this vote.
Mr. President, I would say that what Americans don't like is empty partisanship. That's what's going on today. The Democrats are standing up and beating their chest and saying, Republicans won't let us have a vote. It's untrue. I've offered to have the vote. You've seen the objection here before your own eyes. They won't vote on this. Let's dispense with the empty partisanship. Let's move forward and have a vote. And if they would let us have one amendment, an amendment that would gradually balance the budget over 7 to 8 years, I'll vote for their proposal and I'll ensure enough votes that it'll pass. Thank you, Mr. President.
President,
Senator from Illinois.
before yielding to the senator from North Carolina, I would like to note that last night the two senators who just finished their colloquy had an opportunity to vote for the Boehner Plan, which required a constitutional balanced budget amendment, and both Senators Lee and Paul are registered as having voted to table the Boehner approach, which include that requirement for a balanced budget amendment. I yield to the senator from North Carolina.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, we are here debating the government's fiscal deficit today, and it's an important topic, one worthy of serious debate. Of course, I wish I could characterize the mindless partisanship of the last several months as serious debate. But I fear that this do-nothing debate is distracting us from another deficit that is front and center in the hearts and minds of the American people, and that is the jobs deficit. Just yesterday, the Department of Commerce reported that the economic recovery has been far slower than previously thought. Our economy grew at a rate of less than 1% in the first half of 2011. Now, that's not news to the hardworking families in North Carolina, where unemployment statewide is almost 10%, and nearly 500,000 people are looking for work. They've been struggling since the housing boom went bust 4 years ago. Those people with jobs haven't seen the size of their paychecks increase, but their monthly bills have certainly been increased, along with the cost of gasoline. Just getting to your job in the morning, if you're fortunate to still have one, is more expensive. And yet we spend all of our time in Washington bickering, posturing, and name-calling. There must be, watching from home, our constituents scratching their heads and wondering why Washington is debating whether we should avoid a default that would make this economy even worse. Let me tell you what's happening in North Carolina. Since the start of the recession in 2007, we have lost over 300,000 jobs in my state. More than two-thirds of the counties in my state, 60 out of 100, have unemployment rates above 10%. And in my hometown of Greensboro, the unemployment rate is stuck at 10.8%, the same level as last year. That's right, no change in 12 months. People are working harder without getting ahead, or looking for work longer without being able to find a job. And yet we continue to spend all of our time in Washington bickering, posturing, and name-calling. The people of North Carolina and the people of this great country are fed up with political games. They are saying and telling me enough is enough. What they want is for members of Congress to come to the table, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, find bipartisan solutions that can get our economy growing and putting people back to work. For example, common sense legislation such as the America Works Act that I introduced to create a nationwide and industry-recognized portable credential system so that employers with job openings can find those workers with the right skills, and that workers with the right skills can find the jobs that they're qualified for. There's also the bipartisan Hire a Hero Act that my colleague from Massachusetts and I introduced to combat the unacceptable trend of higher unemployment among our veterans. And let us not forget that we have a program that's been expired since February that helps workers who have had their jobs shipped overseas find new work. There is action that we could take, but these common sense ideas aren't getting their due time because of the partisan shenanigans going on now. This past month, I went on a budget listening tour across North Carolina, and the messages that I kept hearing were that we need to address our mounting debt and get our long-term fiscal house in order. We borrow 40 cents of every dollar that we spend, and it's hurting our ability to invest wisely in the things we need to, like education, infrastructure, and research and development that will ensure a prosperous American future. And yesterday, with my office receiving a barrage of calls from concerned constituents, I answered phones all afternoon. The message that I heard was loud and clear. Please stop the partisan posturing and get something done. Unfortunately, the plan from the House falls far short of those goals of bipartisanship and consensus. Instead of aiming for compromise and certainty, it represents just another partisan short-term patch that ensures the debate will drag on for another 6 months. And, Mr. President, after what Washington has put our country and the markets through, I don't know anybody who thinks it's a good idea to do this for the next 6 months. We all need to remember that we were put in office what we were put in office to do. We were not sent here to fight for the sake of fighting. We were not sent here to see who could win the most political points, and we certainly were not sent here to throw this country into a default crisis because of our own inability to compromise. But we were sent here to get the work done, work together on solutions to the most pressing challenges of our time. More importantly, revving up the great American economic engine to allow businesses to hire and to get the American people back to work. Mr. President, the clock is ticking, and the challenges of reducing our debt and our deficit are undoubtedly difficult, but they're not impossible. Not if Washington takes to heart the message of principled compromise and leadership that I receive every day from North Carolinians. We must commit to a balanced, bipartisan plan that reduces our debts while protecting our seniors, students, and veterans, and makes the critical investments in education, infrastructure, and research and development that we need for a prosperous American future. And we need to focus on the most important goal of all, and that's jobs, jobs, jobs. Mr. President, I urge all of my colleagues to support the Reid Amendment and to put this crisis behind you. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're faced with a difficult challenge, and we know that the American people watching this over so many days now understand the basic challenge we face. It's a challenge of reducing deficit and debt and cutting spending, but also making sure that we have a bipartisan agreement to pay our bills and to meet our obligations. And I think if I had to boil it down to 4 words, it is this, in terms of what people in Pennsylvania have told me that we must do. It's very simple, but I think it encapsulates everything we've got to do in the next couple of hours, really the next couple of days, and that's compromise for our country. That's what people are looking for. People all across the country. I hear from families in Pennsylvania all the time. These are families that have led lives of struggle and sacrifice, families that have lived through so much already. Many remember and have lived through the Great Depression and World War II and wars after that, economic downturns, personal tragedies, job loss, all kinds of misery and all kinds of difficulty. But throughout our state, and I think throughout the country, people have figured out a way to work together, to compromise in their own lives, even when they don't want to make a compromise, and they figured out a way to work together, whether it's at a work site or at home. And I hear from people all the time these same messages. Let me just give you a sample of some of the feedback that I've gotten from Pennsylvanians just in the last couple of days. We purposefully chose 3 letters, or excerpts, I should say, from 3 letters from 3 parts of our state: southwestern Pennsylvania, the middle of the state, and the eastern side of our state. Fayette County, way out in western Pennsylvania. Here's an excerpt from a letter I just received. Quote, "In order that we do not dip back into recession, it's imperative that responsible people start acting in a responsible manner. get this issue resolved in a manner that is best for the American people and not what is best for, quote, political parties, unquote. That's one letter, or part of one letter from southwestern Pennsylvania. Then I moved to the middle of our state, literally called Center County. Please stop the bickering and work together to get the job done, says part of the letter. Do your jobs. Come to a compromise. That's what people in the middle of Pennsylvania wrote to me just recently. And then thirdly, an excerpt from a letter in the eastern part of our state, Bucks County, a suburban Philadelphia community. And I'll read two sentences from this letter. Quote, we must immediately raise the debt ceiling so that we do not default on our debt payments. That would negatively impact our nation. Next, we must tighten our belts and develop plans to reduce expenditures and raise revenue, which would pay off all debt, just like my family's household did, unquote. So there you have it. Three parts of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, three different letters from three different constituents, all expressing some fundamental basic sentiments that they have, and I think some very fundamental messages. What are those? Well, maybe I can boil them down to four. Number one is work together and compromise. That's in almost every letter we see. Work together and compromise. Number two, they want us to cut spending. They know that in their own lives, they've had to cut spending. They've had to change their spending habits to deal with this economic trauma that they've been living through, even if they haven't lost a job, even if they haven't lost their house or their hopes or their dreams. So they've had to cut spending. Number three, focus on jobs. One of the casualties of this week after week of focusing on this question of raising the debt ceiling meant that we weren't taking action to incentivize the creation of jobs by use of the tax code or other strategy. Fourthly, I think the message you're telling us, obviously, is reduce deficit and debt. And they know that we may not be able to put in place a plan right now to do that, but they expect us to put in place the foundation for that, or a strategy or a pathway to get to substantial deficit and debt reduction. So whether it's cutting spending or reducing deficit and debt, whether it's telling us to compromise and work together and to focus on jobs, I think the message that the people of Pennsylvania are giving me, and by extension I think all of us, I think that message is very clear. That's why when I look at what's in front of us tonight when we're debating, we're going to be debating the proposal set forth by the majority leader. Some basic elements in here that aren't just sound policy, but they are in fact incorporating compromise already, significant compromise. For example, making sure that if one side says we have to have a dollar-for-dollar reduction in spending to meet the challenge of raising the debt ceiling, the majority leader's plan does that. One side says that we shouldn't have any revenue. We shouldn't have any additional revenue as part of this agreement. The majority leader said, okay, I'll accept that, I'll compromise. So there are two significant and substantial compromises that he's already made in this proposal. And he's open to more. As he has said all day long and for many days now, he's open to more compromise. The legislation cuts spending significantly, almost $2 trillion alone in spending reductions for so-called discretionary spending. Lots of savings in other ways throughout the legislation, creating a bipartisan committee that will recommend additional deficit reduction to be voted on by the end of this year. And then importantly, part of what the majority leader put forward today, or yesterday I guess, in his proposal was part of what Senator McConnell put forth, the Republican leader. So by my count, there are 3 or 4 major compromises already in what the majority leader put forth, and he's open to more compromise. So I think that's what the people of Pennsylvania expect me to do, and I think that's what the people of the United States expect all of us to do. And finally, one of the best parts of this proposal is that it gives us certainty. I hear from business people all the time, big firms, medium-sized firms, and small businesses. And they tell us over and over again that in addition to the pressures that they feel, the difficulty they have in keeping their employment levels up, the difficulty they have in making ends meet, in the aftermath of a recession. They tell us over and over again, we are business leaders and we need certainty. Or I'm running a small business in Pennsylvania and I need certainty. I need to know what my tax rates will be. I need to know what the business climate will be like. Please give me certainty. One of the best features of what the majority leader put forth is that there is certainty. We're not going to have to debate this thing and fight about it every 6 months. It provides some certainty into calendar year 2013. That's why I think a 6-month extension makes no sense at all. But you don't have to take our word for it. The rating agencies have made it very clear that if you do a 6-month extension, you're taking a very dangerous step that could lead to a downgrade in our credit rating. So I think the Reid plan already has substantial compromise. And, of course, we can compromise more. So I think it's very clear what the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are telling me. In the midst of all of the suffering, in our case, 479,000 people still out of work. We have an unemployment rate of 7.6, which some states wish they had. But it doesn't really matter what a percentage is. When you have 479,000 people out of work, even though the number's been going down for the last year, people are hurting. They're still struggling. They're still worried. They're anxious. They're worried about their children's future. And the least that they, or what they asked of us in this debate, the least that we must do for them is to come together, work together, surrender some political points of view, surrender some personal disagreements we have, come together, reach a compromise. And I believe that what they're telling us over and over again is that we need a compromise for our country. Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to give a voice to Minnesotans to relay their thoughts on how Congress should resolve this impasse and raise the debt ceiling to avoid a default. On Wednesday, I received an email from a constituent in St. Louis Park, my hometown. His email reads, "Dear Senator, I am a Republican. I am a Minnesotan. I'm a small business owner. I am considered to have a high income relative to the average American. Here's my request. Please work together to get this debt limit impasse settled." On Thursday, I received this email from a man in Bloomington. He writes, "I'm a small businessman in the middle of a fundraising effort. The concern over the debt ceiling has caused all the angel investors to put off any discussion of investment until they know what is going to happen. This has stopped my ability to raise funds, which will lead to two new high-quality jobs in Minnesota. I support a simple bill that increases the debt limit to get us through the 2012 elections, as has been done hundreds of times before." Yesterday, I received an email from a couple in Bemidji. Quote, "We are retired small business owners who are watching our very, very conservative retirement account drop and plunge due to the inability of Congress to come up with a plan for the debt ceiling. We trust your judgment as a senator, but plead with Congress and the Senate to come up with a solution. We absolutely cannot afford to see our retirement savings sink again like they did in 2008. And it's not just individual citizens. I received a letter from Dakota County's administrator. The letter reads in part, "If the federal government does not resolve its fiscal issues in a timely and responsible manner, it will drive up costs to taxpayers here in Dakota County. Being able to borrow at the lowest possible rates has meant that our county's taxpayers have gotten more and better public facilities, from libraries to senior housing to highway interchanges, and saved hundreds of thousands of dollars for both property taxpayers and senior housing residents in the past several years alone." The city of Chaska reached out to my office explaining that they are planning to sell debt in August to fund a street reconstruction program and refund their water treatment plant. If Congress fails to act, these projects will come at a much higher cost to residents of Chaska. I received a particularly compelling email yesterday from a woman from Falcon Heights. She wrote, "I'm writing again to say I support the President and realize a need to compromise. It is scary for a 66-year-old retired school teacher who has Medicare and Social Security. Scarier is a default and what it would do to the economy." That's advice from Sue. Sue gets it. She gets that Congress's failure to act may have a direct impact on her. But the impact is really for the whole economy. And Sue is asking for us to compromise. And compromise we have. Let me make one thing clear. Leader Reid's plan is a compromise. Let me make another thing clear. House Speaker Boehner's plan is a Tea Party plan. Harry Reid's plan is a true compromise. It contains all spending cuts and zero revenues. During these debates, there have been lots of ratios floating around. Senator Conrad, the budget chairman, proposed a balanced and sensible plan that had a one-to-one spending cut to revenue ratio. Personally, I like that approach. President Obama was negotiating a 4-to-1 or even 5-to-1 spending cut to revenue ratio. In the Reid plan, there's no ratio. It's 100% cuts and zero revenue. Secondly, it contains dollar-for-dollar spending cuts to match the debt ceiling increase. This is exactly what the Republicans have been asking for. Yet, this morning, I learned that 43 of my Republican colleagues have signed a letter to Leader Reid signaling their opposition to his proposal. Why? Well, they say that the savings from winding down the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan don't count. Specifically, they say that these savings are, quote, a widely ridiculed accounting gimmick that breeds cynicism, unquote. Yet all but 3 of the 43 senators who signed this letter voted for the Ryan budget on May 25th this year. That budget counted the same drawdowns as almost identical in savings. So those savings were legitimate enough to secure their support for the Ryan budget, but not legitimate enough to secure their support for Leader Reid's debt ceiling compromise. And here we are on the precipice, and suddenly they've done a 180-degree turn. Either these savings count or they don't. You can't have it both ways. So we are proposing exactly what Republicans have been saying that they want. Yet instead of accepting this deal, they are using what precious time we have left to push forward with their agenda, and it's not even their agenda. It's the Tea Party agenda. Their radical agenda is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Last night we voted down Speaker Boehner's plan, which requires the passage of a balanced budget constitutional amendment. A balanced budget amendment sounds, on its face, sensible. But in reality, all of the current House proposals for a balanced budget amendment would have disastrous consequences for our nation. A balanced budget constitutional amendment would do permanent damage to our social safety net by slashing spending to 18% of GDP. That's what they all propose. We haven't had a spending ratio that low since 1966. And today's America is very different than 1966. We have a much older population. Today we have a higher percentage of people drawing on Social Security and Medicare benefits, more than ever before. Health care costs are 50% higher. Even during President Reagan's tenure, spending averaged 21% of GDP. What would an 18% cap really mean? Well, let's use the Republican Study Committee's budget proposed in April as an example. A budget like theirs is roughly what we would expect if we capped spending at 18% of GDP. Their budget cut non-defense discretionary funding by 70% by 2021. Like the Ryan Plan, the Republican Study Committee's budget ended Medicare as we know it, changed it into a voucher program, and raised eligibility to 67, but it did it more quickly. Their budget raised the Social Security retirement age to 70. It resulted in important programs like food stamps and Medicaid getting cut by 50%. The Republican Study Committee budget was the Ryan budget on steroids, and I'd like to remind you of what happened to it on the House floor. This is an interesting story, because this story shows you just how extreme this budget was. Most House Republicans didn't actually want such a harmful, draconian budget to be the official House budget. But many of them wanted to go on record to brag to their Tea Party supporters that they had voted to slash $9 trillion in federal spending. So they scheduled a vote and just assumed that Democrats would vote it down for them, and then they could just blame the Democrats. Well, the minority whip, Steny Hoyer, caught wind of their plan and had an idea. So moments before the vote, he asked Democrats to vote present. This would leave the onus squarely on the Republicans to vote it up or down. Chaos erupted in the House as Republican leadership realized what was happening. Too many votes had been cast in favor of the radical budget, and it was on the verge of actually passing. Frantically, Republican leadership got a number of their members to switch from yes to no, and in the end, 119 Republicans voted in favor and 120 against. Crisis averted. That's how bad this plan was. And a balanced budget amendment that capped spending at 18% would essentially do exactly the same thing. This is a perfect example of political posturing. We voted down Speaker Boehner's plan last night for that very reason. His plan wasn't about finding a real solution. It was all about political posturing. If it became law, it would subject Americans to a very scary Republican Study Committee reality. House Republicans have shown that they don't really want that. The American people definitely don't want that. The American people have clearly said that they want compromise. They want an honest effort to meet in the middle. Sue from Falcon Heights is one of them. Leader Reid has responded to the pleas of the American people by offering us a sensible compromise. I urge my colleagues to be statesmen for the sake of the country. Please come to the table. We are trying to work with you for the sake of the country. The clock is ticking. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
The senator from Illinois.
Remaining in the period allotted to Democrats.
4 minutes, 20 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I see Senator Coburn's on the floor, and I assume he's the first speaker on the Republican side. Thank you. I'd just like to thank the senator from Minnesota for his comments on our budget situation. For the many who have gathered here in watching this at home and listening to this debate, this is an historic weekend where we have an opportunity, in fact a challenge, to come forward and craft a bipartisan solution which is good for this country and avoids the disaster that would happen Tuesday night if we fail to extend our debt ceiling. The United States of America has never failed to extend its debt, not once. And in the last 72 years since we enacted this law, we have had requests from presidents on both sides of the aisle to extend the debt ceiling 89 times, 55 times by Republicans, 34 times by Democrats. The president who holds the record for extending the debt ceiling, President Ronald Reagan. 18 times in 8 years, tripling the national debt. Not once, not one time did he face what we're facing here, a threat from the other side of the aisle that if we don't give in to their request, we will default on our national debt. That would be a catastrophe. It is one thing to call a bluff. It's another thing to call a bluff with someone else's chips, because the victims, if we default on this debt, will not be members of Congress. The victims will be families and businesses all across the United States. If we watch interest rates go up as we're in the midst of an economic recovery, people will be laid off. More people will be unemployed. That is exactly the wrong thing to do. We need to come to an agreement. We need to come to our senses. And what the American people have told us across the board is we need to reduce spending, to reduce our deficit. We need to do it in a sensible way, as the senator from Minnesota said, to carefully choose those areas of waste and inefficiency and unnecessary spending, but not to cut the essential benefits that people need. You will hear those come to the floor and say, well, we're just spending more money. Well, the obvious answer is, in some respects, we are. But keep in mind this one statistic. On January 1st of this year, 10,000 Americans reached the age of 65. On January 2nd, another 10,000. On January 3rd, again. And every day since January 1st and every day for the next 19 and a half years, the baby boomers are now reaching retirement age. Having paid into Social Security and Medicare for a lifetime, they fully expect and deserve the legal benefits that they have been promised. That is a new obligation of government, but one that we accepted when we enrolled them in the system. Now we can find ways to make sure those benefits are going to be guaranteed into the future with sensible changes in entitlement programs and with sensible changes in our spending. I find it hard to believe that many on the other side are arguing they can't find one penny that can be saved in the Pentagon. I think we can save money there without endangering our security. I find it also difficult to understand the argument that we can't raise one penny in taxes on the wealthiest people in America if we're asking everyone else across the board to sacrifice. We've got to have a balanced approach. The presiding officer from Virginia was part of a group of 6 senators, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. We have been joined in our effort by the senator from Colorado, Senator Bennett, trying to find a bipartisan way to deal with this deficit situation. I am heartened to say that some 36 senators have come forward on both sides of the aisle saying we can deal with this as adults, we can deal with it in a comprehensive and balanced way, we can keep our promise to people when it comes to the basic programs like Social Security and Medicare, and we can do it in a fashion that reduces our deficit and avoids the crisis which we are facing. So I hope I see the senator from Oklahoma here. He was part of that gang. It seems like we've all gathered here on the floor at this moment. Many of us have. And I would hope that in that spirit we can come to a bipartisan agreement to resolve the current crisis.
President. The senator from Oklahoma.
Thank you. I've been listening in my office for the last several hours to the debate. And I think there's one thing that really hadn't been brought out in the debate. When Washington says it's going to cut spending, it's untruthful with the American public, because both the Boehner bill and the Reid bill increase discretionary spending over the next 10 years by one of them $830 billion and the other $832 billion. How is it that we can, with a straight face in this body, talk about a cut when in fact we're going to, and CBO says we're going to actually increase the spending in the discretionary accounts over the next 10 years nearly $1 trillion. And you've heard the debate in the House, in the Senate, of a spending cut. And of course, that goes to what the heart of the problem is in our country, is words get twisted around to the advantage of the politicians, but to the disadvantage of the American citizens. We are in trouble financially. Most people agree with that. We have programs that are in difficult straits. Matter of fact, they're broke. They're not just in difficult straits. Here's the ones that are broke. Medicare Part A Trust Fund, worst case scenario this year, 2016. That's the fund that solves and pays for hospitalizations for our seniors. Now, we've heard a lot of statements said about Medicare. The average Medicare recipient paid $130,000 into Medicare. The average Medicare recipient takes $350,000 out. How long do you think that can continue? How long can we continue to tell seniors that we can continue a program based on its utilization rates, based on its reimbursement rates, based on the tax rates, that has a $220,000 difference between what goes out in benefits versus what comes in? It's broke. Medicaid's broke. The reason it's broke because the states are broke trying to take care of it. We mandate what they must do, and yet the states are choking on Medicaid. And we're choking on matching the amount of dollars. And under the Affordable Care Act, it is now estimated 25 million more people will go into Medicaid. So it's broke. The census, it was broke before it started. It cost twice what it did 10 years ago. $8 billion more than what it was estimated. Fannie and Freddie, we know they're broke. They're $190 billion that you have now committed for to pay to get them out of the hock. Congress created that, $190 billion. And that is where we are today. It's going to be $300 or $400 billion that we have to pay. We will be required to pay. Citizens of this country, Social Security, people say it's not broke. We have $2.5 trillion worth of IOUs. Well, the fact is that money's gone. Congress stole it, spent it on other things, and now we lack the ability to go into international financial markets to borrow that money to put that trust fund whole. So why do we need to reform Social Security? So we can make sure it's there in the future. What we do know is in 2032 now, according to the trustees, that everybody on Social Security will only get 77% of what they're promised, and every year after that it will decline. So that when my kids are on Social Security, they will get about 40% of what the average Social Security recipient gets now. And we know we can fix it, and we know we can fix it and make it sustainable forever. But we won't do that because that's politically difficult. The U.S. Post Office is bleeding every day, yet we haven't fixed it. We're going to do a gimmick to buy it some time. But the fact is we've set it up under a system when they negotiate labor contracts under the arbitration system, they can't consider the financial health of the post office. That'd be like paying somebody to mow your grass and saying they'll set the price on it and you can't negotiate what the price is. And yet they're going to lose $8 to $10 billion this year and more every year going forward. And yet we've not fixed it, not done anything. Cash for clunkers. Absolute, when you look at the dollars and the homebuyer program, new homebuyer program, they actually had a negative effect on the economy. That's what the studies show now. So we blew through all that money. The Highway Trust Fund, what is used to build highways and roads and bridges in our country, is broke. We're looking for $13 billion to try to make it whole. And all we did was transfer the last 3 years to that. Rather than reform it, we didn't do anything about it. The new government-run health care programs. Here's what we know is the new studies show that over half of the employers in this country will drop their insurance for the people who presently have insurance at work. Hundreds of billions of dollars of additional taxpayer money are going to be required to subsidize the exchanges that those people are going to go into. Because the penalty for dropping somebody's insurance is economically too low to keep employers from doing that. So we have all these programs that are broke, and we have a discussion about the debt ceiling, but we're not talking about what the real problem is this government is twice the size it was 10 years ago. Twice as big. And it'd be great if all of it was constitutional. It'd be great if it was all effective. It'd be great if it was all efficient. And it would be great if we could afford it. But the fact is we're where we are today with $1.6 trillion deficits because we can't afford the government we have. And so we've not concentrated on the very areas where we can find mutual agreement. We've had 3 bipartisan bills in here where we've cut money, significant monies, $1 billion here, $5 billion here, $7 billion here, $3 billion here, go through the Senate with vast majority votes, only to go nowhere because the allowance for the debate on the underlying bills was stopped. Bills were pulled. So what do we do? Well, the first thing we do is we look at what the problems are. What are the problems? We have 100 different programs with 100 sets of bureaucracies for surface transportation alone. Why do we do that? Why haven't we fixed it? That's a question the American people ought to be asking. We have 82 programs to improve the quality of our teachers run by the federal government across 7 different agencies. Only one of them is the Department of Education. Why are we doing that? Where's the assessment of how well they work? Where's the metrics to say we should be spending this money in this way because we're getting return? Not one of them has a metric on it. Not one of them's ever been measured of whether or not it's effective. We have 88 economic development programs in 4 agencies for which we spend $6.8 billion, and we have another 100 economic development programs in 6 other agencies for which we spend another $4 billion, and not one of them has ever been measured to see does it improve economic activity. And if, in fact, it does, why do we have 188 separate agencies to stimulate economic development? I mean, this isn't complicated stuff. It's common sense. Every American, other than the Congress, would fix that. We have 56 programs to teach financial literacy to the American people. First of all, I'd question whether or not we ought to be teaching anybody financial literacy as a government when we run so poorly. But if, in fact, we do, why do we have 56? And, oh, by the way, not one of them's ever been measured to see if it effectively teaches somebody financial literacy. We have 47 job training programs, cost $18 billion a year, 9 different agencies, 9 different sets of bureaucracies, and all of them but 3 overlap with the other. That's according to the Government Accountability Office. Why? Why would we do that? We have 18 programs for food for the hungry. That's something we all want to be involved in. 18? Why 18 sets of bureaucracies? How well are they working? Are they effective? Could we do them better? The question hadn't even been asked by Congress. We have homeless programs for both prevention and assistance, 6 different agencies. So you have 20 different sets of bureaucracies that are designed to do the same thing. Disaster response and preparedness inside FEMA alone. Inside FEMA alone, we have 17 different programs. Inside that one agency, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. I ask the question, why? Why hasn't it been a priority for us to work on those? So what would you do?
Would the Senator be willing to yield for a question? Or
I'd be happy to yield to the Senator.
Engage in a colloquy? Mr. President, it may surprise the Senator. I hope not. I don't think so, but it might surprise some people listening to this to hear that from this side of the aisle, a lot of us here have enormous respect for what the Senator has been talking about and fighting for and what he has achieved. And I might add, he is one of those courageous senators who has come together in the last months, working months as part of the so-called Gang of Six, to try to bridge the gap here and see if we can't find a way forward. And as I listen to him, there's an enormous amount of common sense in the questions that he's asking. These are questions all of us need to join into. And we need to join into them in a process that allows us to be able to fairly and in a balanced way work on the grand bargain, as you call it, the big fix. Now, I'd ask the Senator Because I think a lot of Americans listening to this debate, I've been listening to it somewhat on the floor, somewhat back in the office, and I think people have got to be saying to themselves, these guys are kind of talking past each other, or something's being missed here. Because you hear things from this side, they sound reasonable. You hear things over here. So people sort of say to themselves, what's hanging up this process? Why is the entire country being held hostage here? So I'd like to ask my colleague if he'd help us kind of bear down on what we need to do here. And I'd ask him if it isn't fair and accurate to say that the so-called Gang of Six, terrible name, I think, maybe we call them G6, but came together with an understanding that we needed balance in the approach to satisfy both sides and build a critical mass. And that balance required cuts. You have to put the big items, the big-ticket items on the table. That means fixing Social Security, reforming it for the long term. Medicare, Medicaid, unsustainable on the current paths. Defense, we've got to find a handle on some of the procurement and expenditures. But we also, and I think the Senator joined in this, have to close some tax loopholes and have tax reform and find some level of revenue and an appropriate ratio that allows us to fix this. And that's where the problem has been, that there are a group of folks over in the House who have just insisted no revenue at all. And what I'd ask the Senator, isn't it fair to say that the Gang of Six came up with a sort of more balanced approach on which I believe the Senate could find the ground of compromise? What Senator Reid has proposed, I believe, has cuts that the Republicans have supported, maybe not quite enough yet. So maybe we can negotiate.